it's very interesting on how you guys really calculate on how you're going to pick a guy in a fantasy league. So it's very unique.
Yeah. It's there's so many different really, really good content creators out there. They all have a different style of the way they draft, the format that we play, our approach to how we come up and formulate what players we're going to pick. I mean, when you get heavy into it, man, it comes down to like a science. So it's a lot of fun to digest. Personally, I'm more of a numbers guy. I rely on the numbers. Numbers don't lie. People do. Okay. So I trust the numbers a lot of the time. But I'm also a huge, like, real football fan, so I love, Sundays are lockdown Sundays for me. I don't leave the couch. We watch every single game. We got the Sunday ticket on. So I like to watch football. I enjoy the sport. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my process, but it is really, really fun. And I know we're in the middle of an off season right now, but there's a lot of stuff going on right now, man. There's a lot of stuff going on in free agency, in the real football world, that has some fantasy implications. So excited to be here and talk a little bit of football with you guys tonight, man.
As you guys know, we are talking to freelance Dynasty Fantasy Football content creator Jesse Reeves, if you're wondering who he is. Why don't we get into today? I mean, the story coming out that Davante Adams gets traded to not the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders, in probably the more dynamic divisions we've seen getting built this offseason, with the LA Chargers adding the players that they have, the Broncos adding the quarterback that they have, and then obviously Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. When you heard that Davante Adams is going to be a Las Vegas Raider, what could you see in a fantasy point of view, where the terms of that trade?
Okay, well, first and foremost, from a real football perspective, I'm upset about it. Okay, I'm upset because I am a lifelong Chargers fan, and just when you feel like you're getting kind of comfortable with where you're standing, you make a lot of defensive, moves, and we're moving and grooving. They go and they get the best wide receiver in the game. And for me, from a fantasy perspective, it's exciting. I think it's exciting for Derek Carr. Derek Carr, for everything that he's gone through in the media, for everything that he goes through every single year. He is more of a middle of the pack fantasy and real life quarterback, but I think this elevates his floor a little bit more. He's coming off a really, really good season, in my opinion, especially for what that team's record was. From a fantasy perspective, he's coming off of a pretty dynamic season. And I mean, outside of Amari Cooper, a young Amari Cooper, this is the best player. This is the best offensive weapon he's ever had, in my opinion. I mean, I love Darren Waller. I think Hunter Renfrow is an incredible route runner. He's a really, really good wide receiver, and somebody that I actually invested heavily in my fantasy drafts when he was drafted. And so I'm excited to see how it's going to pan out. As a Chargers fan, I'm upset, I'm angry, but it does add a little bit of fuel to the fire. I'm excited. For Davante Adams in particular, I'm not sure, because he's going from one of the most prolific quarterbacks in the game that we've seen over the duration of his entire career. We're coming off of, a decade plus of just incredible production, where that offense was largely filtered through him. I mean, their wide receiver twos are Randall Cobb, Alan Lazard, who I really enjoy too. Like, you pick them up in your fantasy drafts now because the Davante Adams is gone, but that offense really largely filtered through Davante Adams. And it's going to be interesting to see how much of the Raiders offense and that target share is going to be filtered through Davante Adams this upcoming season. I think it's going to be a lot. Davante Adams he's a target hog. He's one of those guys that commands a very large percentage of the target share there. I wouldn't expect that to change, but is Derek Carr going to be able to get him the ball consistently? Is he going to be able to pay dividends the way Aaron Rodgers did in those crunch time situations, or just regular game flow situations? And it begs a lot of questions on, does Davante Adams' ceiling from, an extremely plus points per game average, I think we're looking at the number is roughly about 21.5 points per game in fantasy PPR leagues. Is that going to kind of come down? Even if it does, and he's sitting in that 17, 16 range, he's still a top 8 wide receiver in among all wide receivers in PPR formats. But if that does come down a little bit, I mean, it's going to be an interesting thing to kind of watch. So from a fantasy perspective, I'm excited to watch it. I just don't know if Derek Carr is going to be able to funnel him the ball as much as, an Aaron Rodgers did.
So from the other perspective of the Josh McDaniels perspective coming to the Raiders as the coach now, the Patriots offense revolves a lot around the tight ends, the pass catching running backs, not as much from a fantasy perspective, the receivers. Yes, you'll have your PPR monsters like Welker was at the time, Edelman, guys like that, but they weren't considered top 10 receivers for fantasy. So from that kind of perspective, both with Davante Adams and also those other targets that you mentioned, what do you think will end up being the outcomes for them?
Well, I don't think you trade your first round pick and your second round pick this year and you pay a guy a 5-year, $141 million contract if he's not going to be the guy. I think they brought him in to be the guy. And obviously that's going to be a little bit of a hit to a Hunter Renfrow and a Darren Waller. But in my opinion, like, you just don't spend that type of draft capital and you don't spend that type of money to come in if you're not going to give a guy 10 plus targets a game. I think that's in the plan. Now, whether or not Josh McDaniels is going to be able to consistently scheme that up for that offense, that remains to be seen right now. His past offenses, like you mentioned, are going to be funneled a lot through the tight end position and being able to do dump offs to your running backs and being able to get them in space. But I mean, Davante Adams has proved time and time again, it does not matter. He is the alpha on the field. And looking at the numbers, looking what he's commanded on, in his time in Green Bay, I just don't see any way that you can't have him on the field and look at him and be like, that's just the guy. It's similar to kind of DeAndre Hopkins leaving Houston and going to Arizona. He's just going to slot in and be that guy. He's going to be the guy that they're going to funnel their offense through.
As everybody knows, we are talking to freelance Dynasty Fantasy football content creator Jesse Reeves. Jesse, you look at the AFC, and the AFC is really just booming. You're really in the free agency market, even here in New York. The Jets have made quality moves. They added Conklin. They added C.J. Uzma. You add the tight end talent that they had. They added Tomlinson. When you look at, the New York Jets and what they've done so far this offseason, because there's a lot of New York fans listening to the show, what are your thoughts going into a new season with Zach Wilson? Does this team really transition and obviously become the team that a lot of people have been expecting for the last 20 years?
I really hope so, because I have quite a few shares of Zach Wilson in a couple of my dynasty leagues, and I think he can potentially take that next step. They, if I remember correctly, there's been a couple pieces that were added to the offensive line, if I remember correctly, or am I misreading that?
Mm-hmm.
I think they kind of bolstered that a little bit too. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to be kind of interesting to see, can they protect him? Can they let Zach Wilson do what he does best, which is get in space, make off-platform throws, and give him the opportunity to do that. Now, another guy that I'm really intrigued by too is Elijah Moore. Okay. Mm-hmm. He kind of came on at the end of last year. I think we're looking at, he had roughly about 77 targets, which is really, really good. A good target share that we're looking for a rookie. And he finished in the top 50 of all PPR wide receivers last year. So I'm really intrigued by him. It's just going to be interesting. There's a lot of ebbs and flows. The Jets kind of have this sort of stink about them right now after Sam Darnold and then transitioning to this new rookie quarterback that was kind of a turnover machine last year, right? So from a fantasy perspective, we're hoping that he's able to take that big jump, kind of mitigate a lot of those turnovers. And he did have some really good games down the stretch. Somebody that I'm really eyeing in my fantasy drafts, as especially if you're playing in a super flex league, somebody that can just be that shoe in for that quarterback too. He's not a guy that I'm looking to invest in super, super early, but definitely in the middle rounds, I'm looking to grab some Zach Wilson shares and hope that he can really take that next step.
So you mentioned you were a Chargers fan, so they were one of the heavy spenders of free agency and also the Khalil Mack trade too. And we've seen the Chargers be notoriously cheap, where they don't keep their players a lot of the time for second contracts, outside of like LaDainian Tomlinson, Antonio Gates, guys like that are franchise icons. So do you think it's a changing of the guard for the Chargers, where it comes to the ownership maybe stepping away and maybe letting the football guys do it more? Because I think your GM is brilliant and drafted very well the last 5 years, but there's other factors that have hindered the Chargers from taking that next step. So do you think this is the time to really make that kind of move? And is it a changing of the guard for them?
I think it is right now. I think you're looking at a team that has Brandon Staley's fingerprints all over it right now. I think he came in last year and he knew that the team that he was inheriting was going to come with a really, really strong quarterback. And it had a lot of good offensive weapons in Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler. They went in, they drafted Rashawn Slater at 13 last year. And I think you saw them kind of fortify the trenches, signing Corey Linsley to a massive deal as well. And Brandon Staley came in and understood that the team that he was inheriting had a lot of talent, but it was going to take him implementing his entire system, coming in and really putting his fingerprint on that team for them to succeed. And I think you're seeing that kind of pay dividends this offseason. I think another big factor too is you have to capitalize on having a star rookie or star quarterback on a rookie deal. You have to do it because Justin Herbert is going to get paid. He's going to end up getting paid somewhere in the ballpark, probably that Patrick Mahomes money, especially if they go deep into the playoffs this upcoming year. And it's, all the moves that they've made start to pay those dividends. If they make a deep playoff run this year, Justin Herbert is going to command a large contract. So you have to utilize the window of having a rookie quarterback to be able to add all of these pieces and the cap space that they had this year and bringing in all the defensive talent. Now it's time to kind of flip that coin. And when we enter the draft, it's time to add some offensive weapons. I mean, I think the two glaring holes on the offense right now are the wide receiver and the right tackle position. We can get away with having Storm Norton as a rookie tackle, or excuse me, not a rookie tackle, a right tackle right now. I think it's time to add that offensive, that dynamic playmaker. You have Mike Williams, who's a 50-50 ball specialist. Keenan Allen, who's a route running savant, and he's just one of those guys that commands that immediate attention. He's that wide receiver one. Now it's time to go in and get some dynamic playmaking ability and give Justin Herbert somebody to throw down the field to. So I'm excited for that team. I'm really, really excited for the trajectory of them. Unfortunately, it seems that the whole division is understanding that there's a lot of potential happening with the Chargers, and they seem everybody's kind of stacking up right now and adding their own offensive pieces and adding defense and everything, man. So it's going to be an interesting year for that team. I think they're creating that 2-year window right now for a legitimate Super Bowl run. And with a quarterback like Justin Herbert, I mean, you have to, absolutely have to.
Now, Jesse, you look at Denver. They had Russell Wilson. You listened to his press conference the other day. He looks very, very happy. He wanted to go to the big city. He didn't really go to the big city because Denver really is like Seattle. It's a big city for football, but not the city that he wanted. He wanted to go to L.A., but obviously both L.A. teams have their quarterback in Matthew Stafford, and obviously you just said Justin Herbert. And then over there on the East Coast, the Jets have Zach Wilson, and the Giants, Daniel Jones, where a lot of people thought that Russell Wilson quite possibly could be traded to the Giants. That wasn't going to happen with obviously Dable heading over there. He wasn't going to bring in Russell Wilson in his first year. When you look at this Broncos team, they've got a bunch of weapons. Javonte Williams, a young running back, really showed everybody why he was drafted so high in the second round. Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Patrick Surtain on the defensive side of the ball, Bradley Chubb, Justin Simmons. This team is stacked defensively, offensively. They got a lot of offensive weapons. They just needed the quarterback. Drew Lock wasn't the answer. Teddy Bridgewater wasn't the answer. You add Russell Wilson in this division, this stacked division. What do you see Russell Wilson at 100% with the weapons that they have over there with the Denver Broncos?
Yeah, I'm excited for it because Denver felt like one of those teams that were legitimately just a commanding force at quarterback, kind of away from being a playoff contender, right? It felt like one of the only things that was really holding them back was having that just alpha quarterback. And Russell Wilson just adds a lot of dynamic ability. He can run, he can heave it down the field. He's got a beautiful deep ball. And he's a guy that, he he was a guy that came in with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. He's had so many incredible players around him, and now he's going to a place in Denver where they have a lot of key pieces there. Don't count out Tim Patrick as somebody that I think is going to be he's going to be a force as well. I think when you look at Jerry Jeudy, who had a down season this year, granted he missed about 7 or 8 games if I remember correctly, he had a really, really prolific rookie profile coming out. His analytics really, really shined, and this is kind of a make or break season for him. Hopefully he can stay healthy. Cortland Sutton, coming off of that ACL 2 seasons ago, last season, he was okay, right? It comes down to them not having a signal caller that can get him the ball, but still finished in that top 45 in all PPR wide receivers as well. And they have, like you mentioned, Javonte Williams. I know Melvin Gordon is still kind of up in the air, but Javonte Williams is somebody that I think you give him that volume and he's going to be very, very close to one of the top 10 backs in the league, especially from a fantasy perspective. Don't overlook their offensive line either. I think he's coming into a situation that has a pretty good offensive line, probably better than he's ever had in Seattle. And I think he's going to be able to make a lot of moves. I think you're looking at Russell Wilson going to be fantasy relevant, real football relevant, and it just does a lot for that franchise right now.